So, what are we doing to ensure that our kids are getting experiences in nature? And what does it mean to be, having your feet in grass or down at a beach by the ocean? And how, as a system, are we setting ourselves up in this very urban environment to be able to have our kids exposed to opportunities like that?
Welcome to the Education Matters podcast, where we explore the ideas, people, and challenges shaping education today. I'm your host, Jason Bucheri, and on today's episode, we're speaking with Mark Pearmain, Superintendent of Surrey School District, the largest and one of the most diverse school districts in Canada, and probably the entire world. Mark leads an organization of over 80,000 students and about 12,000 staff across 130 schools. But his journey to becoming a superintendent is as compelling as his leadership today. Growing up in West Vancouver, Mark wasn't the stereotypical straight A student you'd expect of a superintendent. Instead, he found his footing on the sports field and in doing group projects where he honed the collaborative and leadership skills that would define his career. Mark's background as a history teacher and his love for teamwork, whether in sports, drama, or education, shaped his approach to leading large, complex systems. In our conversation, Mark reflects on the evolving role of superintendents, balancing the responsibilities of being both a prime educator, as he describes the term, and a chief executive officer of a large organization. We dive into the complexities of managing one of the most diverse school districts in Canada, addressing equity, fostering trust, and navigating the challenges of rapid urban growth. Mark also shares insights from his career in education, including how his team is exploring hybrid learning models to prepare students for the future of work, and creating open, honest dialogues about racial equity. From the lessons of history to rapid advancements in AI, Mark's perspective combines thoughtful leadership with a forward-looking approach to education. Whether you're an educator, parent, or fellow superintendent, Mark's insights are sure to leave you with some new ideas and certainly a lot to consider. So grab your coffee or your sneakers, whatever floats your boat, and join me for this fascinating conversation with Mark Pearmain. Hi, Mark. Welcome to the podcast. Where does this podcast find you today?
I am in my office here at the Surrey School District. Beautiful sunny day. I'm looking at the fall colors, and it's a stunning day out in BC.
Wonderful, Mark. So I would have given you a proper introduction at this point, but can you update the audience as to your current role and what keeps you busy these days?
Sure. I am currently serving as the superintendent of the Surrey School District here in the province of British Columbia. We are, the largest school district in the province, about 83,000 kids, 13,000 staff, 130 odd schools in beautiful Surrey. If you don't know where Surrey is, it's just outside of Metro Vancouver, in between essentially Langley and New West, and it's a huge geographical kind of space, about 360 square kilometers. So pretty diverse here, pretty varied in terms of the different cultures that we have in the city, and is the fastest growing city in the province. So lots going on.
Excellent. I certainly want to discuss in greater detail the education system in BC and Surrey in particular. But before we do that, I'd like to introduce the audience to the guests in, I guess, a more personal way by starting with where and when did you grow up and what was that like?
Yeah, so I grew up in BC, grew up in West Vancouver. I'm an 80s kid, so went to high school in the 1980s, graduated in 1989. And have spent my entire career here in British Columbia. Went to university and over in the University of Victoria, and then started working in the Vancouver School Board right out of university, and then kind of continued my career from there. So, lived a pretty privileged life. I grew up on the North Shore. It's a beautiful place to live. It's where I still live. Had an amazing experience in school. I was a sports person, so played a lot of sports both in school and in the community. We skied as a family, and really was kind of outdoors for the majority of my K to 12 experience. I wouldn't say, Jason, that I was the stellar student by any means. I worked hard, but I like to play more than I like to work in that sense. And so I kind of got the itch, I guess, in terms of my learning through experience and kind of observing versus kind of reading out of books. And that still carries on today. That's how I learned today. So I had a good K to 12 experience, and then I went to university and thoroughly enjoyed that, and really just enjoyed working with people and working with kids, and ended up in K to 12 as a history teacher, and now I'm a superintendent. So there you go.
It's quite interesting that you are not the first superintendent to tell me that you didn't exactly learn in a typical way, which, I think you might find odd. Someone who leads an education system wasn't just like really drawn to school and textbooks and learning that way. So when it comes to learning, what do you remember as being one of the first things you loved to learn?
I actually think what I loved to learn was interacting with people. So I know you can kind of go back to everything you need to know you learned in kindergarten, and I can't frankly remember that. But what I do remember is the experiences of working with teachers and classmates during group projects. And it was less about the product that I think in the end I really enjoyed, but more about the process of it. And, I think at the time I can articulate it way better now, but I think I had a skill that was able to see, what skill sets different group members had, and then being able to form it in a way that everybody was able to succeed in the area that they were most appropriate to be successful in. And it was interesting to me because there's certain things that I think I'm better at than others. And that's just been a natural gravitation. And I kind of equate that to, back to when I was playing sports, right? Like we all had different roles on a team, but we were a collective team together, and we would be successful by everybody, being successful in their role. And so it kind of connected to me all the way through my schooling in terms of that more soft skill, I guess I would describe it, versus the hard skill of what really resonated with me as I went through K to 12.
I think I'm also going to write something about superintendents and the sports they played, because it also seems to be another thing that many of you have in common. So what were your sports?
Yeah, I played everything. So lots of team sports: soccer, basketball, hockey, volleyball, rugby, all the way through. Basketball was probably the biggest one for me. Like I played 1 year of junior varsity at university and kind of club after that, and just continued on through my university career. And then thoroughly enjoyed, the individual sports as well. So, snow skiing, I still do that. That's a passion of mine now. In the summer, skiing, but on water. So we'll water ski and wakeboard. But I think it's for me anyways, it's that team concept, right? Like you're all part of something together. You're working towards that collective goal. I've got colleagues who also in superintendents, they've come through the arts, and it's interesting because I think it's when you kind of break that down, it's very similar, be it in terms of drama or if it's someone with a music background. You're still part of a team that is putting something together or putting something on. And I think the attributes that you get when you work collectively with people is probably what makes us successful in the roles of superintendents, frankly, because that's that's really what you have to create and what you actually are doing every day with people that you work with.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So it doesn't have to be sports, but those team environments. I think it was I'm pretty sure it was Camus that said everything I learned about life I learned on the soccer pitch, or something to that effect. Don't directly quote me, but and I tend to agree with it. And I think it's a fair point you're making. You can extend that to any real team activity, whether it be acting or anything of the sort. So when it comes to your actual formal education, Mark, what would you change about it if you could? Anything that you would change about the way you learned growing up or the way you were educated?
Yeah, I went through UVic. I got a history geography degree, um, and I'm a history teacher by training. I think that has served me very well. I think there's lots to learn from our history, and kind of going back and seeing what's happened in the past. It's amazing, how often the past comes back and gets recycled in the future, so to speak. I think in terms of where I am right now, if I could do it again, I would do the same degrees, and I would take some more business courses.
Hmm.
Just because the superintendent's job is you're walking in two paths. Basically, you're a chief educator, but you're also the CEO of a business, right? Of a corporate entity, and so certainly that experience of being able to have a little bit more awareness of of how to um, how to have that corporate side without it totally overtaking the education side
Hmm.
of the role would be important to have some more courses in that when I was going through. You learn it as you go, but it certainly is
Mhm.
something that if I could do it again, I would take it more of them.
Would you say that's one of the biggest hurdles for a superintendent? I mean, I think every superintendent I know, maybe with some exceptions now, just starting in Toronto, in Ontario, they all you all come up through the education system. There was no, there is no other way to do it. Would you say that would be the biggest learning curve for you?
Yeah, I think it's as education has become bigger. Our budget here in Surrey is about $1.2 billion, right? A smaller school district in BC, you could have a budget of 10, 20, 30, $50 million. Like that's big dollars when it comes to the public purse.
Hmm.
And one of the beautiful things of being a superintendent in Canada is that the expectation is that you have a teaching degree, like you are the prime educator.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I would not suggest we change that. Um, but I do think for anybody who initially comes into the role, suddenly that business side of it, and being cognizant of it, of what the balancing of both educating and running that corporate entity is a pretty big leap. And it certainly takes some time to get your head wrapped around. Obviously, you're part of a team. You've got a CFO that you're working with, that you can rely on and ultimately, be partners with. But as superintendent, you are the final executive officer. And so it is your responsibility ultimately to ensure that the board is passing that balanced budget, and that you're managing your fiscal responsibilities in a way that is going to allow for you to continue to invest in education um, for the kids. But it's that part of being an employer and being the chief executive of those employees.
Hmm. Do you feel that conflicts with, and I like how you said it, the role of prime educator or lead learner? I've heard other folks refer to it as. Is I don't think there's um, a necessary conflict, but I can imagine at times there is that conflict between, you know, very superficially saying, balancing the books and then doing what's right for students and teachers. Do you find that complicated overall?
Complicated, no. I think that it creates tension, and good tension is not a bad thing. I think that's one of the values of superintendents being teachers and having a teaching degree, because it really pulls it back into focus when you're making those decisions, or you're having to make decisions when it comes to budget, of what does that actually mean in the classroom? What does it mean in the schools, right? And I could see that if you didn't have that teaching background, or the experience in the classroom, how it could become more about the numbers and less about what you're trying to accomplish. And so again, and different jurisdictions do things differently. Ultimately, our role is to serve students, right? And to serve students and provide them with an exceptional educational experience. To do that, you need to have the finances. And so you need to be very aware of the finances, and just to accept and embrace the tension that comes with that. Tension ultimately, allows you to do some amazing things. If you didn't have tension, for example, you would never flex a muscle. If you didn't have a muscle, you wouldn't be able to walk. If you didn't walk, you wouldn't be able to run. It's part of that. It's part of the role, but I think it's something that people need to be aware of, both, I think, internally within staff, because ultimately, people might not necessarily be always happy with the decisions that you're making. But if they at least know that you're grounded in, education, and what it was like in the classroom from a staffing perspective, hopefully there's enough respect and trust built up. And from a parent perspective, it's really just understanding, again, that you would like to be able to put everything into the classroom, but you still need to be able to keep the lights on and make sure that it's heated, and make sure that it's being maintained. And that's the other side of the business that needs to be attended to.
Well, as you mentioned amazing things, can you describe for us some of the most inspiring things you've seen, either as an educator or in your years in an administrative role?
Yeah, that's such a hard question, because there's so many. There's a teacher here in Surrey that she's a kindergarten teacher, and she's made connections with members of the community who are in some cases over 90 years old, and they take class outside every week, and they have members of the community come and participate, and the kids get to learn the curriculum, but they're not in their classroom. They're outside in nature. They're experiencing all the different seasons of the school year, regardless if it's snowing, if it's hot, if it's raining. It's beautiful. And they're being bridged between generations. And I want to just reference again that Surrey is super diverse. So we have 198 languages spoken here in our community. And so when you think of kids who are being exposed to nature as we know it in British Columbia, and this, which may not be their first, their original home, and are being exposed to, senior citizens who are part of our community, who may be culturally different from them, it's a beautiful experience to watch. It really is. And I juxtapose that with, going into a complex high school of 1,700 kids and watching principals walk down the hall and have those individual relationships with kids, where they're just saying, "Hey, Jason, it's nice to see you here today." Or, touching base with another student who's applying for Stanford, and having those touch points. It never ceases to for me to be marveled at how well educators are able to make those connections with kids in different ways and at different age groupings, to make them feel special and seen. And, there's countless stories that I could describe, but I think from just two off the top of my head, that would be off what I'd want to say.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think one day I'm just going to mix the answer to that question altogether to have one huge episode from across North America just describing amazing things happening. Because I've been to Surrey many times, as you know, in the school
Yeah.
district, and I've seen it happen. So you mentioned a teacher and a principal there. What would you say are the best qualities of great teachers and principals?
Yeah, I think I'll also add in educational assistants and office staff
Hmm.
to my answer here. I think the greatest attribute that educators in the community that works in schools have is that they are the most adaptable and flexible people generally that I see, because each person that they interact with are different. Their personalities are different. And so you can watch someone have a very formal conversation with one individual and literally have a 3-second transition to another individual where it's going to be a very different type of communication style. And they're able to reach both kids or both adults for that fact. And they do this without even thinking about it. And they do it multiple times a day, 5 days a week. And what's amazing to me is the skill that they have in being able to just change lanes, adapt, engage, and then get someone settled, and then change lanes again, and then engage, maybe adapting their communication style, and then repeat. I think that as well, when I think of educators across the board, they're also unflappable.
Mm.
So they have a plan in their head or in their lesson plan of what they're going to do. They start. It doesn't go that way. And so instead of trying to force it, they modify and they change. They might take a deep breath to say, okay, how am I going to do this? And then they just go ahead and do something different, but still getting the same information across or the skill that they want the students to experience and to learn. It's quite remarkable. And it doesn't matter if you see it, like, it doesn't matter if you see it in a kindergarten classroom or if it's in a tech shop or if it's one-on-one with an EA. We call them IESWs, working with an individual child, or principal with their staff who are interacting with, in some cases, our staffs are 125 people strong, who all have different ways of approaching things. It just happens. And it's beautiful to watch, because when you think of where a school starts in September and where it ends in June and all the learning, it's being led by someone who's creating that atmosphere for people to just be able to flourish. It's remarkable.
Thanks for that, Mark. And I think if I can put on my parent hat for a second, I appreciate that answer because you kind of give us a view as to what goes on, what kind of dispositions people need to have and do have every single day. But from the parent perspective, sometimes the school system or their child's experience can feel like a little black box. Like you don't know exactly what's going on there. Like they come home happy and or sad in some situations or frustrated.
Yep.
And so you kind of have this this kind of you see the effect of school, but you don't necessarily know what's happening in school. Now, I say that with the full understanding that a lot of the work you've done in BC and Surrey in particular leading the way with portfolios of student work and a lot of new and different ways that parents communicate with teachers. But if I could ask you to provide parents with, let's say, some advice or some insight into some things that are really important for them to understand about their child's experience in the education system, what would that be?
I think the first thing I would say is that, and I want to say this as well as a parent, right? Like I've got
Mm.
2 kids who are through the system. We all have an experience of school. And so we think the experience that kids maybe should be having or are having is the experience that we had 20 years ago. And, the reality is that society's changed, and the needs of kids and what they need to be successful has changed. And the school systems are changing with that. And so one of the things I would want to reassure parents is that, there's core things that we know kids need to be able to do, and they need to be able to do them well. We know that they need to be able to read. We know they need to be able to write. We know that they need to be able to do their maths. And those are fundamental and they're foundational. But we also now know that when you think of society today, a student can go on their phone, which the majority of students have, and they can get an answer to any question that they may have. And so it's not about getting an answer anymore. Now it's about, well, is that answer actually factual? And do they have the skills to cross-reference what they're receiving from Google or from an algorithm that's working through a social media app to be able to actually cross-reference to see, is that actually misinformation? Is that disinformation? Or is that factual? And so what seems like a black box is still pretty similar to what they experience in terms of the foundational skills that their children, our students, need to be successful. And at the same point in time, also the competencies and skills that they're going to need to be successful. So critical thinking, collaboration, being able to articulate themselves and work with people who have different perspectives, and be able to really engage in a society that is changing on a very rapid course. And I think where there's sometimes a little bit of discourse is that we go back to the way school was and think, well, that's the way it should be. But we also have to recognize that society from 1989, when I graduated, for example, we had the Apple IIe computers, right? The Nano iPod hadn't come out yet. There was still the discussion between VHS and beta, whereas today we're streaming, and kids can get music and video on demand on a phone, on a laptop, on an iPad. So if you think of it, we really need to make sure that the systems and be able to articulate this to parents, that really what we're trying to do is to ensure that their kids are leaving our system set up to be successful in the current environment, not the environment from when we went through, because the environment's different.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at some point our kids are going to be like, we went to school before there was even anything such as an artificial general intelligence invented, and we still had to figure out between Gemini and ChatGPT. Like, it's going to feel that way maybe forevermore with the rate of change. But I think that's an awesome point about effectively learning how to think. Critical thinking is what's going to allow you, no matter what the environmental change is in technological terms, to navigate that world in hopefully a productive way.
And I would take it like this, Jason. Think of this. A student in the 1950s had the Encyclopedia Britannica, right?
And that was a great change from years previous to that.
That was a huge change. And then you think kids in the 1990s, the internet's there. You had literally dial-up, and you had the beginnings of Google. Okay, well now for a kid in, let's say, 2010, Google is there. You can ask anything of Google, and it would be able to provide you the information that you could get out of the Encyclopedia Britannica, but much, much more quickly in a digital format. And now you've got a scenario
sprinkled in with a lot of crazy answers to that question too.
Absolutely. And now you've got generative AI that is producing information that some of it is amazingly bang on, and other is just it's what they call a hallucination. So
Hallucination.
so that's where you have, the reality of really teaching the kids the skills of cross-referencing what they're actually receiving. Is this actually fact? Where's the critical analysis is within that? But it's indicative of how quickly things have changed. And my assumption is that when the Encyclopedia Britannica came out, I could only imagine the conversations that were happening about how this was going to, promote maybe cheating or academic integrity questions. And suddenly you have information that is readily available. And what does that mean for school systems and so on and so forth? I don't necessarily think too much has changed. It's just the pace of how quickly things are changing, as well as how the information can be received by kids and where, which is different from a static book in a library to a kid's phone in their kitchen or in their parents, or in their bedroom at home when they're doing their homework. It's just it's a different mindset, but it's a similar challenge that we're working through.
Yeah. One of my great hopes is with all this complexity comes more reflection. I truly hope that's where we're going, not only is in terms of our education systems, which I do feel, in these interviews I've been having across Canada, certainly even the US, that folks in your role are starting to ask as a leader to their constituents these questions, forcing everyone to consider these questions. And I hope that becomes reflected in the way our students think. But if I can zoom out a bit now, Mark, and ask you a little bit about your work in two very large districts in BC. Not a lot of folks have had that experience of, you're in North Van and now in Surrey. Can you kind of describe for the audience what that's like, being the leader of two large districts and what challenges that brings?
Yeah. I'd even say three, because I cut my teeth in Vancouver, which is the second largest school district in the province here. So it's a couple things. I worked my way through different positions. So as I said, I'm a history teacher by training, and I have to say this, there are things I really miss about teaching history and teaching history 12 to kids. And so as I'm doing the role now, both in Surrey, but when I was in North Vancouver, it's not lost on me of where I've started from. And I think, there's a couple things that you learn when you're in the classroom and you've got 30 kids or 25 kids. First thing is 25 kids, they all learn differently. So you can't do one thing and expect everybody to get what you're saying. Number two, 25 kids will have 25 different needs. And sometimes those needs are very personal, and sometimes those needs are to be pushed a little bit harder, and sometimes those needs will actually they need a little bit of extra TLC. No different when you're a superintendent in North Vancouver or if you're a superintendent in Surrey. I also learned in a classroom of 25 to 30 kids that you need to set targets, and you have to recognize that sometimes the path to hit that target isn't going to go the direction that you thought it was. And you might have to make a zig or a zag, but then you kind of keep working towards where you're going. Same thing as a superintendent. I think the biggest difference, Jason, is that changing course in a classroom of 25 kids is a lot quicker than changing course in a district of 16,000 kids or a district of 83,000 kids. A lot of the basic premise of recognizing how you lead is going to be pretty similar. I also would say that, I've been incredibly blessed in the roles that I've had, right? North Vancouver, I went there as an assistant superintendent, and I got an opportunity to start to learn kind of the strategy at the senior exec table, and then was very lucky to become superintendent there for about 5.5 years. And North Vancouver was should say is kind of a mid-sized district where you have enough students that you've got, pretty significant revenue, a couple $100 million worth of revenue. So you've got opportunity to do things, but it's not a huge beast like Surrey is. And so it gave me really amazing experience of, learning how to lead a senior executive team, extending the vision out to your district team and your principals and vice principals to push something forward, but still in a pretty personal way, right? Like I knew every principal's name, every vice principal's name in North Vancouver. Generally had a pretty good sense of what was going on for them in terms of their families and kids and all that good stuff. And, that's one type of leadership. It's a very personal, relational type of leadership that I could extend out to, a good, let's say, 125 people strong management team. Mm. In Surrey, there's 250 plus principals and vice principals. And, even just there's in the district team, for example, there's 6 assistant superintendents, 1 deputy superintendent, and 2 assistant secretary treasurers and a secretary treasurer, and then an executive director of HR, right? So, your sphere of personal relationships becomes a little bit smaller when you're running a larger school district. I certainly can't say that I know every single person who is a principal, vice principal, their name, because it's constantly changing. But what you can do is take the same framework, the expectation of being interested and knowing the people that you're working with, and extend that through to your spheres of influence that you have, with an expectation that flows down through their direct reports and their direct reports. Mm. And when you get the moments to be with people who are running a school, for example, when I go into them, it's to genuinely hear how they're doing and their story and find out what's going on, and try and being able to bring that, personal relationship side to it. I think as well, it is a unique opportunity to have experience in these 3 different school districts. For me personally, it's been the best Pro D I've ever done, because everything that I got to learn in Vancouver, I brought to North Vancouver, and all the things that I wouldn't have done it the way that I did it in Vancouver. I could change and try it again, but a different way in North Van. And the same thing when I came to Surrey. Right. And so it's one of those things that it's hard to leave, right? Like I grieved when I left Vancouver, and I grieved when I left North Vancouver, but professionally and personally, it was just such an amazing experience in terms of pushing my boundaries, pushing my personal and professional growth, to try something new and to put yourself back out there into something that is uncomfortable, with tension, but creates that space for you to develop and learn. So super happy that I've done it, and super happy that I'm here in Surrey.
What do you wish more people understood about the superintendent role?
I think that the superintendent's role, like I said, is walking in 2 paths. That the superintendent is always balancing that tension between the education side of the organization and the business side of the organization. And that, there are some challenges and problems that just may not be solved to the way that everybody wants them to be solved. And that I know, for example, that anytime I make a decision, 50% will be happy, 50% won't be happy. And I know that's simplified. It might be 80-20, it could be 90-10, whatever. So, what I think people should know is that superintendents genuinely don't hear from the people who are happy with the decision. We'll hear from the folks who are disappointed with the decision, or maybe have a different perspective. And I think, when we're making those decisions, we certainly recognize that any decision that we have to make, be it a budget decision or a staffing decision, it has impact, because what we deal with and who we serve are human beings, and so we know that every decision that we make is actually having a trickle down effect to some human being in our system that is going to have an impact. And that's not lost on any of us, and it's certainly not lost on me personally, but I'm going to speak for my colleagues. It's not lost on any colleague. And so as we go through that, I think folks sometimes, forget that we're also humans, and that there's those stressors and tensions that we're working through at the same point in time, that we're trying to make the best decision that we can with the information that we have and the moments that we make them, and then we push forward.
Thank you for that. When it comes to, some of the work that you've led in any of the 3 districts, but happy if you want to talk about Surrey. I know it's maybe a little bit earlier in Surrey for such a question, but maybe not. What are the initiatives that you're most proud of?
Yeah, I'll speak with Surrey. Like, we recognize that society is changing, and we also recognize how diverse we are. So there's a couple things that we've pushed forward with the board's vision here in Surrey. One is just acknowledging racial equity, and that there are challenges that we need to address, and that the experience of some of our kids in our schools has not been exceptional. And I would say that what I'm really proud of is that we haven't shied away from that. We've brought in outside groups to provide opportunities for safe conversations that our staff and students and community members had, and they shared stories that were awful, right, to hear. As a parent, you don't want anybody to experience like that, let alone your own child. And out of that came the board, directing us to staff to come up with a racial equity strategic plan, to create supports within our system, and to begin to acknowledge and address that. And I want to be really crystal clear here. It doesn't mean that we're not having issues that are hurtful to students or staff in our buildings today. Those are still happening. But we now are having open, honest conversations about those issues. We're upskilling our staff and our students and our community members about some of the work that we're trying to do. And it's a space that we're beginning to take steps towards. And I guess I have the long view on this, because what we're trying to do now is to instill in our kids within the Surrey School District, which becomes adults in our community who will become leaders in our community, an expectation moving forward of how our community should be treating each other. I think, the other thing that I'm proud of when it comes to racial equity is that you can just create a department, but our mandate and when we gave direction to the staff when we created this is that you alone are not responsible for racial equity. It's all of our responsibilities when it comes to racial equity. And you will help us collectively do this work, right? Which I'm pleased to say when I observe this from the superintendent's chair here in the district, that's happened. It's not a
Mm.
silo. It's integrating into other areas of our organization, both on the corporate side and in the education side, and other departments who are coming alongside and working with, alongside, and together on that challenge. So I'm really proud of that. I'm also proud of the fact that, you know, we've got space challenges here. We're growing very
Mm.
fast. It's a beautiful place to live. And so, you know, we are in a space that we have to think differently about how we are going to provide exceptional educational opportunities for our kids.
Mm.
And so we really see this in secondary schools. We've got 6 secondary schools this year going on to an extended day platform to be able to just frankly provide more space for our students. But we'll be coming to the board in November with a report on hybrid learning for grade, 11 and grade 12 students, and look to actually pilot that in all of our secondary schools next year. And assuming, that the board, approves that, we would look to then expand that for 26, 27. And one could say that, well, you're looking at that because of a space issue. Really, it's not about the space issue. This is about recognizing, look at you and I today. You're doing work. I'm talking to you. It's completely remote. We know that the work environment and post-secondary school environment is going to a hybrid model. And this is an opportunity for us to actually look at, are we providing the opportunities for our kids to get the right experiences that when they leave us, they know how to conduct themselves in a hybrid environment. They know the skill sets that they need about time management. They have the experience of being able to interact as a part of a team, but not physically together. And so part of the work that we've done is that we've contacted employers who are hiring folks into their workspaces where it is a remote, and kind of unearthing the fact that for some of them it's totally new and it's a challenge for them. And so this is a chance for us to actually push the system forward in a way that we think pedagogically is going to help our kids. It's going to help them build more competencies and skills so they can be excelling when they leave us. And either go to post-secondary or go into the work environment. And I think what I'm most proud of is the courage within the district, at the board level, with the board of trustees, at the staff level, to really challenge our thinking and challenge our assumptions and ask the question, so is there a different way of doing this, right? And then you add on the last one that I think everybody, Jason, is struggling with across, the sector in K to 12. And I think it's a pan-Canadian issue, is labor shortage, right? And so how do you deal with labor shortage in that environment as well? And are there different ways of looking at that employee-employer relationship when it comes to what we offer? So again, open mind, which I think is the most exciting thing that I see in this district, of people really challenging our thinking and challenging, is there a different way to do things, with the core focus of continuing to provide that exceptional experience for our kids in our system.
Well, I can certainly second that openness to the Surrey community. I've always found that Surrey had something special compared to all the districts I've been to, and I think it was more or less made up of people's willingness to be open and to really do what's best for students and families. So I do want to have a bit of a follow-up to what you just mentioned there in terms of managing a board of trustees. You just mentioned how crucial they are in creating a policy or new programs like the one you just described. What's it like to work with a group of elected officials that might not be as experienced or have as much understanding of pedagogy and programs to create these kind of programs that are really necessary for students and families. What is it like working with, how many trustees do you have?
Seven. Yeah, here in Surrey, 7. Yeah. So the way I would answer that question is that there is always a tension when working with a board of education and elected representatives to understanding what is governance and what is operations. Mm. And as a superintendent, across the province, across the country, that is work that we do pretty consistently. It's helping boards understand what the governance side of things is versus the operations. So I'll give you the example. We will come forward in November with a report on hybrid learning and a recommendation for the board. So there's your operations. We will map it out. This is what we think we can do. This is all the different things we've been thinking about: equity, technology, your working groups, so that you have some beta testing, then you can get feedback. But the ultimate decision on this from a governance perspective is the board. So the board will wrestle with the fact, do we want to go down this route? And so part of it is helping the board understand the why. Like, why are we doing this? What are the benefits of this? How does it fit into the strategic plan, which the board has signed off on, and in many cases has co-written with superintendents and their communities? Does it fit within the strategic plan? And is it pushing the district forward? Those are big political, philosophical directions. And that is what a board of education does. So yes, they do technical work of, for example, passing a budget, but they also do that work of pushing forward a system. The difference is that how you operationalize that and how you actually implement it is staff work. And I am again very, very appreciative that I have a very mature board in Surrey that understands the role of governance and understands what's governance versus operations. And so they hold our feet to the fire. They will ask us very challenging questions on the why, on the implementation, on have you thought about equity for students? Have you thought about, equity for staff, for that fact? And, they will challenge us on the thinking, and then they'll come back and say, so how does this fit into the strategic plan? And so here's how it fits into the strategic plan. And then they will, make the recommendation or approval to push forward. For new superintendents and I think new board members, every 4 years we have an election cycle, there's always a re-education of the difference between governance and operations. Because that is, I think folks get elected in and they have ideas of what they want to have happen. And suddenly there's that tension again of, well, actually this is the superintendent's job and this is the role of the board. I'll give you the other example. For example, I am the sole employee of the Board of Education trustees, right? Everybody else, technically, when it comes to employees in the school district, are employed by the school district, which is under the purview of the superintendent. So it's the board hires me to run the district. So if you're working in the school district, you are hired by the school district. And ultimately, if there's a decision that has to be made about your employment, Jason, it would be coming to the superintendent. So there's a fundamental difference.
Yeah, and that's certainly an important difference, right? But how do you, and in your experience in various districts, ensure that the board is themselves educated on, like, let's take a topic like AI now. Yep. AI, and it might be the perfect example here, because AI is not like school district servers with student information, right? Like district servers, your IT, your CTO can explain like, look, we've got this on lockdown. We've consulted with all the right technical groups and the data is secure. This is how we've done it. But with AI, it's not something that I think you can outsource your knowledge. So for them to make informed decisions about, say, AI policy, right? That falls under governance, right? And what they would have to help you do as a group. It's not enough to just say, Mark has someone on the district team that knows all about AI. They effectively have to have some training, some experience. They certainly need to be playing with it to understand not only the capabilities, but the risks. Are there programs in place in BC in particular, maybe, that I don't know about that help educate trustees? Is it also part of the work that you do with them? Can you kind of describe that for the audience?
Yeah, it's both. So in BC, for example, there's the BC School Trustees Association. They have Pro-D events. They have general meetings, for example. One's coming up in November, and there'll be a session on AI. And what does it mean in terms of education, and what are things that boards should be thinking about? There's also, for example, partner liaison meetings that we have with the ministry. So ministry staff comes over. We'll have all the trustees together, or chairs, I should say, together, the chair of the boards together, and to talk through, what's happening in K-12 education. Obviously, AI is a big topic right now. So there's been exposure there. At the same point in time, as a superintendent, you are looking for opportunities to expose your boards into, the big themes of what's coming. So, for example, like AI. So we've held, for example, a parent night here, an open parent night. We had 600 parents come to a theater where we had an expert that we're working with on AI give a general parent presentation on what generative AI is and what does it mean and why are we even looking at this. Trustees are obviously invited to that and can attend. We'll also, for example, have like learning opportunities for trustees on it in terms of the high level thinking. If they want to play with it, if they want to get into what generative AI is in terms of their own life, absolutely, we can help them, explore it a little bit. But we don't necessarily get down into the weeds of how a teacher, for example, could be using generative AI in the classroom and what they would be looking at from a competency or a skill for a student, right? What we would really focus on is, here's the why and here's the what we're thinking about and what we're worried about. So privacy, security of student information, security of board information, corporate information, all of those things from a governance perspective in terms of the risks. That's what we would also be upskilling them on, both in services and different learning opportunities for boards that superintendents put on.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. So, Mark, if I can ask you now to look forward to the future of education, just given we're talking about AI and how you're starting to mobilize AI knowledge with your trustees and your other constituents, can you, kind of forecast for me what you think education looks like, say, 50 years from now? It's more a wild guess.
That's a question. Yeah. Well, I'm going to take it from my local context first, right? I think AI will continue to just explode in terms of its abilities and what it can and can't do. I think we've learned some things with social media that it's better to be a little bit more proactive than reactive. I think we were more reactive when it comes to social media in terms of upskilling kids, and we're going to try and be more proactive with AI. I think as AI continues to develop and the large language models continue to become more enhanced, you'll see more personalized sides of AI, and I'll be really interested to see how that can assist the individual student in terms of their learning. I think it will be fascinating to watch, for example, AI, and if we're talking about learning a math concept, for example, if it's been working with a student and they begin to see the threads of their learning style, of how it actually adapts and modifies a review specifically of whatever topic the student's asking for. I think that'll be really interesting, and I think that's coming. But I also will say this: in 50 years, I think of Surrey. I'm looking at my window right now, and I'm thinking of all of the growth and development that's happening in our urban centers. And I think of right now we have 83,000 kids. 50 years from now, I'm projecting, I guess you'd have 130,000 kids, let's say, in a more urban environment. And so what are we doing to ensure that our kids are getting experiences in nature? And what does it mean to be, having your feet in grass or down at a beach by the ocean? And how, as a system, are we setting ourselves up in this very urban environment to be able to have our kids exposed to opportunities like that? So I kind of see like the parallel path. I see technology is going to continue to rapidly develop and will change the way we live. And at the same point in time, as we're going to adapt in the system to make sure our kids have the skills for that and the competencies for that, if I could wave a magic wand, I would also, at the same point in time, in a parallel path, have opportunities to expose our kids to the natural environment, to that natural learning. When you're pushing around dirt, or you're moving a rock, or you're out hiking on a trail, and you're experiencing that very tactile, physical side of learning that will become more challenged in an urban environment.
Awesome. And you even took my last question there, which is always the magic wand question. And so I appreciate that. And as well as the answer that I know, in particular in BC, but certainly in Surrey as well, is this movement for outdoor education that I really, truly hope the rest of the country looks to and comes to visit your schools to understand how we can do it better. Because I'll tell you, here in Ontario, and people can come at me for this, they live in Ontario and they complain about this, but I know it to be true that if there's a little bit of rain, everybody's inside for indoor recess because they're scared of catching colds, they're scared of the mud in the schools and all those things. And I say, go to BC, go see how those kids and those schools manage it, because the schools don't fall apart. The kids all don't have more fevers and germs than everybody else, but they live outside in all forms of weather. So I appreciate that, Mark. My last question for you. Can you recommend a book, podcast, video, movie, anything or all of the above for the audience?
Yeah. I'm currently reading, it's a book called Embracing Messy Leadership by Alyssa Gallagher and Rosie Connor. It's really meant for kind of how like this school-based leadership teams, but it's always a good reminder of that personal side of leadership and knowing what your core values are and how do you push forward together, which is pretty good. I think there's some, certainly for new principals and vice principals or aspiring leaders, there's some really good nuggets there in terms of what to expect, but also what you can take into that role. And what I really like about it, Jason, is that it's basically based off of 20,000 coaching sessions that they've had, and they've kind of taken all the different leadership lessons together and molded it into some big ideas. I also think that, again, I'm going to go back to my roots. I'm a history teacher, and so I like going and watching what's going on in the world and learning from our history. And I think back to the huge changes that society went through. I think of the society after the wars, for example, in World War II, and suddenly the creation of the suburbs and the huge technological advances when it comes to what society had. And I think of the equality movement in the United States with racial segregation and the upheaval that society went through, those big changes. And I equate it to kind of where we're at today. And what I mean by that is that we are going through significant upheaval and change. And we know that when upheaval and change happens, there is an understandable amount of fear. Like, what does it mean for me moving forward? What does it mean for, society moving forward? And so I think for me personally, I go back and look at that, recognizing that every time we do something, or as AI continues to develop and the school system continues to adapt to AI and changing pieces, members of my community are understandably questioning and maybe a little nervous and maybe a little fearful. And it just really reinforces that, okay, this isn't new. We've gone through it in the past, but we can learn from the past and maybe communicate better and be more transparent of the what, but also more importantly, the why, and recognize that not everybody is going to be on the journey to embracing it at the same point in time. And so we need to have some core principles that we're going to follow. And, one of them being patient and the other one being kind to each other. And I think if we can reinforce that and learn from the lessons of history that society has gone through, we can continue to kind of work forward and push forward and accept the change, and also treat each other with a little bit of grace, with lots of patience, and hopefully a huge dollop of kindness, because it is a little bit disconcerting for folks when things are changing and it's not necessarily what they know.
Mark, I think that's a beautiful sentiment and a wonderful way to wrap up. So thank you very, very much for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Jason.
This podcast is recorded on the Territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Bucheri. Until next time.